as well as in the U.S. Senate campaign. That's what I'd like Gary to stand up and talk to you guys about. Gary, Glenn.
All right, I got to make sure I hit my mark here, so whoever's on camera, tell me if I've done it.
Oh, wherever. We're good.
All right. Well, guys, thank you. I appreciate this opportunity. Let me establish some credentials early on. When I was a senior in high school, now given that I wasn't born in Michigan, so my credentials of supporting Ronald Reagan may go one election earlier than you folks from Michigan. Because in 1976, when I was in senior in high school, I skipped class to go see then Governor Reagan speak at the local mall along with Jimmy Stewart, no less. And they had said the day before, if you brought a note from your mom, you could skip class, go see the president, the potential president of the United States. I forgot to get my mom's signature, showed up at school, and I thought, well, I'll call her at lunch. But that morning, kids were in the hall bragging about how they had forged their mom's signature so they could go lay out at the lake. About 11 o'clock, the principal comes on the loudspeaker and says, we're not going to let anybody else go because we've had too many kids. And I thought, all those kids laying out at the lake, and I'm not going to get to see perhaps the next president of the United States, I'm going. So I left, enjoyed it. The next day I got called over the loudspeaker down to the principal's office, and when I got here, my mother was sitting there. They had called my mother in. Now, I was captain of the Fellowship of Christian Athletes. I was an Eagle Scout, you know, a pretty straight arrow type of guy. And they threatened to kick me out of school because I had skipped class to go see Ronald Reagan. I told the assistant principal, given the same choice over again, I'd do the same thing I did. I did what I had to do, now you do what you got to do. And they didn't kick me out. And my mom never said a word, and I thought she might have even been a little bit proud of me. I got to shake Ronald Reagan's hand in 1978. 4 years later, I married the chairman of Youth for Reagan. And unbeknownst to us, we got married on March 4th. Originally we were planning for June, but we kind of updated it, made it March 4th. We didn't know until years later that happened to be Ron and Nancy's anniversary. So we wrote them a note and said, happy anniversary, and they wrote one back on White House stationery, which we've got framed up in our house. And then sometimes I bring with me my secret weapon to really prove my credentials. My only daughter, Reagan. She had something else to do tonight. My oldest son is named Heston. Now, he's named after Charlton Heston. You shouldn't need to bother asking later on about where I stand on your Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. But I worked with Charlton Heston on the Right to Work campaign in Idaho. I've got a picture of my wife pregnant standing next to him, and our son was born 6 months later, and I've joked with him, it's a good thing he was a boy because he was going to be named Heston one way or the other. But you might ask, oh, and finally I'm wearing elephant hide boots. So that's, and there's other parts of my body that got even thicker skin. I think the Lord equips those He calls, and I've been on the front lines of a lot of tough issues, so I got thick skin. You might ask, why am I interested in running for the United States Senate? Have I lost my mind? I guess you can look on my website, find out a lot of things you might not have time to ask tonight. GaryGlenn.us, and that's G-L-E-N-N. There's no comma in there, it's just GaryGlenn.us. I was raised by a World War II Marine who survived the attack on Pearl Harbor. My dad taught me to love my country and to be willing to fight for my country. My wife and I took my mom and my dad to Hawaii in 2002 in December. He had not been back. He was not in good health. My mom was not happy with me for offering to drag him all the way across the country from where they live in North Carolina. But he got to the point where he finally told my mother, I'm going. I'd like you to go with me, but I'm going with you or without you. We got him an invitation to be on the Arizona Memorial for the memorial services, and he only had 2 seats. He took me. My mom stayed back on the shore, and I got a picture of him with the commander of the All-Marine Forces in the Pacific. And he was wearing a purple lei that day, and all the admirals and generals saluted anybody who had a purple lei. And he and I stood in the street where he stood back in 1941 shooting at Zeros. Barracks were still there he had lived in, same street. He was part of those guys you might have read about that couldn't get bullets for their rifles, so they took a pickup truck and ran it through the front door of the armory and got enough bullets to go out. And they got a presidential unit citation because they found one Japanese Zero that had only M1 rifle holes in it. They said those Marines took out a zero just with their handheld World War I rifles. Well, my dad taught me to love my country and to fight for my country. I've been one of those people, I've been involved in politics since age 20, but I've rolled my eyes when I've heard people say year after year, this is the most important election we're going to face in our lifetime. And folks, I honestly think this one is. I think that everything I love about my country is at risk. You know, we've got beautiful landscapes. I've been in 49 out of 50 states. It's not the land, it's the liberty. It's the constitutionally limited government that gives us unlimited opportunity. It's the Judeo-Christian principles on which this country was founded. And they are all under attack from within. If you, I was born in 1958, you may be a little younger, maybe a little older, but if you had ever contemplated seeing a government take possession of manufacturing companies, and with the Canadian and British examples to show us it doesn't work, socializing the medical system of a country, you might have thought of Fidel Castro or Hugo Chavez. Who would have thought of a president of the United States of America with the support of a senator from Michigan? It's two senators from Michigan, one who happens to be up. That disturbs me, it angers me, because I want to be able to pass on to my children what my father and mother and the ones who came before them passed on to them and then to me. And I'm concerned that if we don't stop them in 2012, Barack Obama and Debbie Stabenow will finish the job, will finish their agenda, which I believe is a purposeful agenda of turning this into the United Socialist States of America and robbing our children of their birthright. And if they're allowed to finish the job, I don't know that we'll ever get it back. That's why I'm running for the United States Senate. And I may also have an overdeveloped sense of duty. I was an Eagle Scout when I was 13. I said that oath about doing my best to do my duty to God and my country. 17 years later, I took another oath during the Persian Gulf buildup about defending the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And so I feel a sense of duty. And if you've got a track record of some degree of effectiveness and action and leadership, and you think you might be able to make a difference, and you care, if you love your country, then that leaves me feeling a sense of duty to respond. And I would tell you that I do have a track record of leadership and action. I'm not talking theory on some of these issues, as Randy indicated. You know, let's talk a little bit about some specific issues. One statistic I think ought to dominate the debate in the campaign for United States Senate in Michigan in 2012. And that is, in the decade that Debbie Stabenow has been in the United States Senate, Michigan has lost 800,000, say it with me, 800,000 private sector jobs. That is the worst job loss in America. Now, you probably, like me, when you hear politicians take credit for creating jobs, roll your eyes. They have nothing to do with creating jobs. They can craft a regulatory and tax environment which makes it either easier or more difficult to create jobs. But if they're going to claim credit when we have good times, then Debbie Stabenow ought to be willing to take responsibility for the fact that we've lost 800,000 jobs in the last decade, which just so happens to be the time she's been in the United States Senate. So what would I propose to turn that around? Number one, on an issue on which I'm not talking theory, I support what Randy's all about, what Randy is doing back there behind the post, Randy. I am fully 100% supportive of Michigan becoming the nation's 23rd right-to-work state. And as a United States Senator, I would join Mike Lee and Jim DeMint and Rand Paul and Ron Johnson from Minnesota, excuse me, as co-sponsors of a national right-to-work law. Michigan must have a right-to-work law if we're going to compete with other states in this country for new job creation, for new plant sites. And the United States of America needs to be a right-to-work nation so we can compete globally for new plant sites that will locate in all 50 states, including Michigan. They'll still come here now, but they'll be in Alabama and Tennessee and South Carolina and North Carolina, in those states that protect individual freedom Randy's absolutely right. This is a freedom issue. Every American, not just everybody in Michigan, but every American should be free to choose to join a union and give money to a union if they want to, but they ought to be equally free to choose not to join or pay dues to a union and not face the threat of being discriminated against and fired from their jobs either way, so that the individual is free to choose. It is a civil rights law. As Randy indicated, I ran the campaign in the 80s. From 80 to 86, I was executive director of the Idaho Freedom to Work Committee that made Idaho a right-to-work state. We overrode a Democratic governor's veto. The unions put it on the ballot, outspent us $3 million to $1 million. We still beat them. We had an African-American postal workers union president in Boise who said it is a civil rights law. He said, you know, I can't be discriminated against or fired based on my membership or non-membership in a certain race, creed, color, or sex by existing civil rights laws, and comparably, right to work is a civil rights law that says I can't be discriminated against or fired based on my affiliation or non-affiliation, financial support or non-support of a labor union, a private organization. Folks, imagine if compulsory unionism did not exist and some group came along and said, we ought to have the power under law as a private organization to have people fired from their jobs if they don't give us money. Would you folks raise more money for the Antrim County Republican Party if you could have people fired from their jobs if they refused? Would you be more powerful politically? Well, of course you would. It's outrageous. You'd be laughed out of the public policy arena, and that's what we ought to make compulsory unionism. We ought to make it a laughing stock. But in addition to being a freedom of choice issue and a civil rights issue, it is the most dramatic thing this state could do to attract new business and industry. In the last 10 years, the top 5 states in America for creating jobs, all right-to-work states. Bottom 5, all compulsory unionism states. Bringing up number 50, Michigan. 800,000 jobs in the last 10 years, which just happened to be the same time Debbie Stabenow has been in the United States Senate. 2/3 of all right-to-work states right now have higher per capita income than the state of Michigan does. Over the last 50 years, in measuring the growth of income in the 50 states, guess who's number 50? Well, Michigan. And 8 of the top 10 with the fastest growing income are right to work. We're talking about freedom of choice, the freedom to work, the freedom to work for more. And everything it would mean to Michigan, it would also mean to the United States of America if we had a national right to work law. Now, folks, I know this gets kind of sensitive when you talk about other candidates. But when Pete Hoekstra comes up here, you're going to need to ask him why he does not support right to work. The National Right to Work Committee is supportive of my campaign. Pete is endorsed by the Teamsters. He speaks at the Teamsters National Conventions, and he said on television last year that if it was on the ballot, he would probably vote against it. So, does a legitimate difference on issues make a difference to you when you're choosing your nominee for the United States Senate? Does it make a difference if you have a candidate who can take it straight to Debbie Stabenow on the millions of compulsory dues-funded political machinery she'll have working for her? Or what if our nominee is somebody who can't take her to task on that issue because they have the same position, they're also endorsed by union officials?